Why was everyone laughing at her? The laughter rippled across the Colorado air like small detonations, sharp, mocking, confident. 12 recruits stood lined along the Fort Carson firing range, their uniforms crisp, their smirks unhidden. In the middle of them, one woman adjusted the strap on her Kevlar vest. Calm, focused, pretending she didn't hear. Staff Sergeant Sarah Mitchell had heard it all before: the jokes, the bets, the soft disbelief. "Maybe try something lighter, ma'am," one of them said, voice soaked in Texas bravado. "That M24's got a kick that'll knock you on your ass." The others laughed louder. She didn't respond. Not yet. Instead, she ran her fingers across the cold metal of the M24 sniper rifle, a weapon that in her hands wasn't a symbol of strength or power. It was memory, ritual, connection. Every smooth motion, every click of the bolt carried the echo of her father's voice from years ago, soft but firm: "Respect the weapon, and it'll respect you." The wind picked up from the east, 8 miles an hour. The kind of crosswind that frustrated amateurs and humbled overconfident recruits. Sarah adjusted the rifle, her green eyes narrowing behind the scope. Her expression gave nothing away. "All right," she said finally, her tone calm, almost conversational. "Let's make it interesting." The laughter quieted just a little. "I'll take 3 shots, 3 distances, 300, 600, and 800 meters. After that, you'll each take the same. If you beat me, I'll recommend every one of you for advanced sniper training." Sergeant Cooper, the Texan with the swagger, grinned, looking back at his friends. "And when we outshoot you?" Sarah let the smallest smile touch her lips. "Then you run the obstacle course in full gear, twice." It was subtle, but the tone shifted. The laughter was gone. Now there was something else, that mixture of curiosity and challenge that soldiers understood well. The line between confidence and recklessness. She dropped to the mat, laid behind the rifle, and the noise of the world fell away. For her, the firing range had always been sacred ground, where everything unnecessary dissolved. All that existed was breath, trigger, wind, distance. Inhale, exhale, halfway, hold. The same pattern her father had taught her under the red-orange skis of rural Colorado years ago. But before she squeezed the trigger, her mind drifted back, 15 years in the past, to the moment that began it all. She was 14 when her father first placed a rifle in her hands. A summer morning, the smell of pine and oil on the air. Her father, Master Sergeant William Mitchell, call sign Ghost 6, was a man built from silence and steel. He'd served in places she was never allowed to know about. His uniform always hung perfectly pressed, but his eyes carried the weight of something she couldn't name back then, something like ghosts. He'd taken her out to their family's property, just the two of them, carrying a black case. Inside, a Remington 700 bolt-action rifle, sleek, lethal, beautiful. "Your mother knows?" she asked, hesitant, nervous. He smiled. "She knows you're growing up, and she knows this isn't about guns, Sarah. It's about discipline, focus, respect." He showed her how to assemble it piece by piece, explaining every part like a craftsman. When he handed it to her, she'd been afraid, not of the weapon, but of what it meant to hold something capable of such irreversible power. "The rifle doesn't care who pulls the trigger," he'd said. "It doesn't know if you're a man or a woman. It doesn't know fear or ego. It only responds to fundamentals." Then he placed a hand on her shoulder, and fundamentals are everything. She missed her first shot by a mile. He didn't flinch. "Again," he said softly. "Remember what I told you, breathe with it." By sunset, she'd hit the target 3 times. Not perfect, but enough to make her heart race. That night, on the drive home, he'd said, "You've got a better eye than I did when I started." She never forgot that. Years later, when everything fell apart, those words would be the only warmth left in the cold machinery of military life. Now back on the range, she breathed the way he taught her, slow, precise, alive. 300 meters. Her first shot broke the silence with a single, sharp crack. The round hit center mass. The recruits didn't flinch. 300 wasn't impressive. "Beginner's luck," Cooper muttered, chewing his gum a little slower. She said nothing, just stood and walked to the next position. 600 meters. The wind had shifted, 10 miles an hour, maybe more. Most of them wouldn't notice that subtle change, but Sarah felt it. She adjusted one click left, two down, exhaled, squeezed. Another perfect shot. This time no one said anything. A few exchanged uncertain glances. They'd all trained at these distances. They knew what a lucky shot looked like and what mastery felt like. 800 meters. This was the test, the range limit, the distance where small mistakes grew fatal. Sarah settled her cheek on the stock, her mind eerily still. She adjusted for drop, crosswind, humidity, 1,000 variables flowing like a quiet equation through muscle memory. Her father's voice whispered again, "It's not about power, it's about patience." Crack! The sound echoed across the valley. Through the spotting scope, even the recruits could see it, center mass. A perfect triangle of precision on 3 targets. The range went silent. Even the wind seemed to pause. Sarah stood, cleared the rifle, and looked at Cooper. "Your turn." They tried, God, they tried. For an hour, 12 recruits shot until their shoulders ached and their confidence shattered. The best of them, Cooper himself, hit 2 of 3, 300 clean, 600 close, 800 a miss. When it was over, the only thing louder than their labored breathing was the silence of realization. Sarah leaned on the bench, calm, not smug. "Looks like you've got some running to do." That's when the door at the end of the range opened, and the laughter died for good. 2 officers stepped in, one a tall man with salt and pepper hair and the kind of posture that told stories of decades in the field. The other, older, with 3 silver stars on his chest. The recruits snapped to attention. "Carry on," the base commander said, Colonel Marcus Blake. But the general beside him, General Robert Morrison, head of all U.S. Army sniper programs, walked forward, eyes scanning the targets. "Whose shots?" he asked. "Mine, sir," Sarah said. He nodded once, lips tightening in a faint smile. "I thought so." The recruits looked at each other, confused. Morrison turned, addressing them directly. "You boys know who you just competed against?" No one answered. "You were shooting against the record holder for every long-range engagement on this base. 47 confirmed kills across 2 combat tours, and the daughter of one of the finest Delta Force operators this country ever produced." He turned to Sarah, Master Sergeant William Mitchell's girl, Ghost 6's legacy. The recruits' faces drained of color. Morrison continued, "She's the best shot I've ever seen, man or woman, and the reason you're standing here instead of deployed in a war zone is because soldiers like her know how to keep you alive from 1,000 yards away." Cooper's eyes fell to the ground. Shame and admiration mingled in his face. Morrison looked back at Sarah. "We're building a new program, advanced sniper integration across all branches. You're our lead candidate." Sarah said nothing. She'd been offered positions before. They all came with politics, with whispers, with resistance. But something in Morrison's tone, measured, sincere, made her pause. He wasn't offering a promotion. He was offering a purpose. As the recruits dispersed, Cooper approached her, eyes low. "Ma'am, I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "I shouldn't have doubted you. You're the best shooter I've ever seen." Sarah met his gaze, calm, firm, human. "Don't apologize, learn. The world's full of people who'll underestimate you. Let them, then prove them wrong." He nodded, and for the first time all day, she saw respect, real respect in his eyes. Later that evening, alone in the armory, Sarah cleaned her rifle slowly. The smell of oil and steel filled the quiet space. She thought about her father again, about the funeral, the folded flag, The words he died in a helicopter accident. Words that never felt true. She thought about the old soldier at the service who had pressed a business card into her hand and whispered, "If you ever need answers, call me." And she thought about the strange way the world seemed to circle back, how every shot, every mission, every mocking voice brought her closer to something unfinished, something waiting. Outside, the last light of day faded behind the Colorado mountains. She looked at her reflection in the rifle's polished bolt, calm eyes, faint scars, quiet fire. Then she whispered, almost to herself, "I'm not done yet, Dad." The sound of wind rattled the windows, soft, distant, familiar. And for just a second, she could almost hear his voice again. Breathe, aim, trust what you know. Why had her father really died? That question never left her. Not at the funeral, not during the quiet nights that followed, and not when 3 men in dress uniforms came to her mother's doorstep 2 years later with carefully folded words and hollow condolences. Helicopter accident, they said. Routine transport mission, they said. But Sarah could read men, and the men who stood on that porch, eyes trained, tone rehearsed, were not telling the whole story. She'd grown up watching her father measure truth like distance, with patience, precision, and instinct, and everything about that briefing smelled wrong. There were no personal effects, no recovered rifle, no mention of the classified operation he'd been pulled back into after years of retirement. Just a sealed envelope, a medal, and a promise that his sacrifice would not be forgotten. It was. Her mother stopped talking about him. The house grew quiet, and every photograph of William Mitchell began to feel less like a memory and more like a secret. Until one man at the funeral changed everything. He was older, gray hair cropped close, eyes sharp as a blade under weathered skin. He waited until the ceremony was over before approaching her. "James Harrison," he said simply, "your father and I served together." He handed her a card, no title, no rank, just a number. "If you ever need anything, call me." She never did. Not right away. But 3 months later, on a night she couldn't sleep, the folded flag staring at her from the mantel, she dialed that number. "Sergeant Mitchell." "Not yet," she'd said quietly. He chuckled, "Then let's change that." Basic training wasn't the kind of challenge Sarah feared. It was too predictable. The pain had rhythm, run, crawl, shoot, repeat. She thrived on structure, on the precision of doing something hard until it became easy. But it was the eyes that bothered her, the way men looked at her uniform, then at her face, then at each other. Like she was a tourist. One drill sergeant said it loud enough for the platoon to hear. "She doesn't belong in the mud, she belongs in admin." Sarah didn't argue, she didn't have to. She just waited until marksmanship qualification day. By sunset, her grouping on the target board looked like a single whole. The instructor stared at it, then at her. "You ever consider sniper school?" She almost laughed. "Women aren't allowed in direct combat roles, Sergeant." He spat into the dust. "Times are changing. Maybe not fast enough, but changing. You shoot like that, someone will find a way." Someone did. 3 weeks later, new orders arrived. Fort Benning, Georgia, Advanced Marksmanship Program. Not the official sniper course. That door was still locked to women, but something close enough to make people uncomfortable. The first day, she walked into the range and froze. Because standing at the far end, clipboard in hand, was James Harrison. "Didn't think I'd see you again," she said. "I pulled some strings," he replied. "Hope you don't mind." "Why?" she asked. Harrison looked at her with a mix of pride and something heavier. "Because your father was the best shooter I ever knew, and because this country needs more people like him, disciplined, lethal, and impossible to underestimate." Then his voice hardened. "You ready to earn that reputation, Mitchell?" "Yes, sir." "Good, because I'm not going to take it easy on you." He didn't. Training under Harrison was brutal, but it was fair. Days blurred into wind calls and recoil bruises, mental exhaustion and endless repetition. He made her shoot in the rain, in fog, in crosswinds that turned bullets into guessing games. Breathing off, he'd bark. Too much muscle tension. Stop trying to control the rifle, let it breathe with you. She never quit. And when she succeeded, he didn't praise her. He just nodded once, adjusted the distance farther and said, again. But not everyone wanted her there. Captain Robert Reynolds, one of the senior instructors, made his opinion clear. "This isn't a social experiment, Harrison," he'd said one evening, unaware that Sarah was within earshot. "We're training soldiers for war, not playing gender politics." Harrison didn't flinch. "With all due respect, Captain, she can shoot circles around half the men you've passed." Reynolds had just smirked. "We'll see." Sarah did see, in his eyes, something colder than skepticism. It wasn't that Reynolds doubted her skill. It was that he feared what she represented. Change. Proof that talent didn't look the way he'd been taught to recognize it. So she gave him proof he couldn't ignore. By graduation, she ranked first in her class. Her scores broke 3 facility records. Even the shooters who once rolled their eyes started asking her for advice. But victory was quiet. She didn't celebrate. She just kept moving, because every time she pulled a trigger, she remembered a promise. Your mother knows you're growing up. Learning to shoot isn't about weapons. Her father's voice still echoed, steady, patient, alive. And she wanted to know why it had been silenced. Afghanistan, 2004. Her first deployment came faster than she expected. Assigned as a designated marksman to a forward operating base in Kandahar, she was the only woman in her unit. The base was a circle of sandbags, steel, and doubt. Day 1, one of the Rangers asked, "You lost, ma'am. Intel office is 2 tenths over." She smiled politely. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." 3 weeks later, she proved it. A routine patrol turned ambush. The morning sun was cruel, the kind of glare that blinds scopes and burns lungs. Insurgents opened fire from rooftops, machine guns cutting through the narrow street. The commander went down. Chaos. Sarah was at the rear with her spotter, Corporal Miller, a man who'd made it clear he didn't trust her. "We need elevation," she said, scanning the horizon. He hesitated. "That's an order, Corporal." They sprinted under fire, ducking into a half-collapsed building north of the main road. From the second floor, she saw it all, the smoke, the confusion, the angles. 15 hostiles, Miller counted. "Make it 14, she whispered. Her first shot cut through the dust, hitting a gunman mid-run. Second shot, the machine gunner. Third, the sniper on the far roof. Each trigger pull was mechanical, efficient, exact. By the time reinforcements arrived, 8 enemy combatants were down. The rest had fled. Miller looked at her like she'd rewritten gravity. I didn't think that I could shoot," she finished. He nodded. "Now you know." When they returned to base, she filed her report, handed in her rifle for cleaning, and sat alone outside the barracks watching the sky turn from gold to blood. That night, the unit commander, still bandaged from shrapnel, limped over. "Those were some of the most difficult shots I've seen anyone make," he said. She looked up. "I had good teachers, sir." Commendations followed, but so did whispers. Some said she'd fabricated her kills. Others suggested a male sniper had taken the shots. She ignored all of it, because every bullet she fired brought her closer to the one truth she couldn't shake. Her father's last mission hadn't been an accident. Pieces of information began to surface. Fragments of conversation, scraps of classified reports, half-erased names. Operation Phantom. A mission involving her father, a Russian defector, a bioweapons program. Every night she jotted notes into a small leather-bound journal. Names, coordinates, clues. Most of it was meaningless, until one word kept repeating. Zakharov. A Russian scientist, a ghost in intelligence files, the kind of man whose existence was always above clearance. And then one morning, she received unexpected orders reassignment. No explanation. Just coordinates. A helicopter waiting on the tarmac. When she landed, the first person she saw was Harrison. He stood on the landing pad, beside a bunker that didn't officially exist. "What is this place?" she asked. "Off the record," he said, "always has been." They entered a windowless room lined with maps and photos. "This is where we handle operations the Pentagon doesn't acknowledge," Harrison said. "Your performance got noticed, Sarah, but that's not the only reason you're here." Her pulse quickened. "Then what is?" Harrison looked at her for a long moment before sliding a folder across the table. "Because of this, because of your father." The folder was marked classified, Operation Phantom. Inside, photos, field notes, a name underlined 3 times. Viktor Zakharov. Harrison's voice was low. "Your father wasn't killed in an accident. He was hunting this man, a KGB bioweapons expert who vanished after the Cold War. Your father found him, and someone didn't want that report making it home." Sarah stared at the pages, her breath caught between disbelief and rage. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because we might be picking up his trail again." She looked at the photos, grainy satellite images of mountain compounds. "I want in." Harrison hesitated. "You don't even know the mission." "I don't care, I want in." He studied her, saw the same fire that once lived in her father's eyes. "You know this could destroy your career. So could pretending I don't care." He nodded slowly. "Then let's get to work." That night, as she lay in the dim light of her quarters, Sarah flipped open her father's old journal, the one he'd carried in the field. The last entry was dated 2 days before his death, just 4 words. "Phantom compromised, trust no one." The words burned in her mind like tracer fire. She looked out the small window toward the dark mountains beyond the base, their outlines sharp against the moon. Somewhere out there was the truth. Somewhere a man named Zakharov was still alive. And somewhere, someone in her own country had helped bury the truth. She whispered it like a promise to the wind. "I'm coming for you, Dad. Whoever they are, they're not done, and neither am I." What kind of place didn't exist on paper? That question lingered as Sarah followed Harrison down the reinforced corridor, each step echoing off the concrete walls. The bunker smelled faintly of oil and cold metal. She could feel the hum of generators beneath her boots, the sound of secrets kept alive underground. The sign above the door simply read, "Restricted access, Tier 1 clearance." No emblem, no unit insignia, just words designed to keep questions away. Inside, a war map covered the entire wall. Pins, strings, coordinates. Red dots clustered over the Caucasus Mountains, parts of northern Afghanistan, and a scattering of unnamed locations marked only by code words. Harrison gestured toward it. "Welcome to the shadows, Sergeant Mitchell. Officially, this place doesn't exist. Unofficially, it's where we hunt the ghosts no one else admits are real." She scanned the map, eyes drawn to a familiar name, Zakharov. It was circled 3 times. Her pulse quickened. "You said my father was hunting him." "He was," Harrison's tone softened, "and we think he almost found him." Sarah approached the table at the center of the room. Photographs were spread across it, aerial shots of compounds, weapon caches, and one image that made her blood run cold. A man's silhouette, blurred but recognizable. Tall, narrow frame, gray hair, sharp eyes behind wireframe glasses. Viktor Zakharov, the man her father died trying to find. CIA tracked him for years, Harrison continued. Defected in the 80s, claimed he was done with weapons development. They used him for information on Soviet bioengineering programs. Then he disappeared. Sarah frowned. You think he went rogue? He didn't just go rogue, he reinvented himself. He's been building something called the Osiris Protocol. That name Osiris, it stuck in her mind like shrapnel. What is it? Officially, nothing. Unofficially, he paused, his eyes narrowing. It's a continuation of a bioweapons project the Soviets abandoned after the Cold War. Your father found evidence it was still active. 2 days later, his helicopter was shot down. She stared at the map again, her father's last known coordinates marked in black ink. This isn't coincidence. No, Harrison said, it's unfinished business. Training began the next morning at 500. It wasn't like any training Sarah had known before. This wasn't about physical endurance or standard marksmanship. This was about the art of invisibility, the kind of skills meant for people who officially didn't exist. Most shooters learn to survive, Harrison said during their first session. We train to disappear. Days bled into nights. She learned extreme long-range shooting, beyond 1,200 meters, sometimes up to 1,800. She studied ballistics under temperature variance, wind layer modeling, and acoustic camouflage. Her targets were often invisible, simulated through heat signatures or laser refraction. You can't see the target, Harrison would ask. Then you find what moves around it. Sometimes they trained at dawn when the horizon blurred and colors flattened. Sometimes in rain so heavy it erased sound. Every detail mattered: the way breath condensed, how fabric reflected light, how sound bounced off stone. Harrison pushed her until she stopped thinking like a soldier and started thinking like a phantom. You've got the same instincts as your father, he told her one night after another grueling session. But he used to fight the silence. You've made peace with it. Sarah looked through the scope at a paper target half a mile away. Silence is honest, sir. He nodded. That's what makes it dangerous. Weeks turned into months. The small unit operated like a family forged from secrecy, bound by shared knowledge and mutual trust. But trust came with limits. Sarah noticed the locked doors, the data terminals requiring retinal scans, the names she wasn't allowed to hear. Sometimes at night, she'd pass men in plain clothes who didn't wear insignia or ranks. Intelligence officers, analysts, ghosts of their own. One evening, after a 14-hour training cycle, Harrison joined her in the mess hall. You've been asking questions, he said, sitting opposite her. I'm trying to understand what I'm a part of. That curiosity is going to get you killed someday. Then I'll die knowing. He smiled faintly. You sound just like him. They ate in silence. Then Harrison spoke again, voice quieter. You want to know what happened to your father? Sarah nodded. Then you need to understand the system he was caught in. Men like him, like us, we operate in layers of truth. The deeper you go, the more the truth bends. He looked up, eyes hard, and the men at the bottom, they drown in it. 2 months later, she met Captain Robert Reynolds again. He arrived unannounced, all-pressed uniform and hard-edged arrogance. His presence changed the air immediately. Harrison greeted him with the restrained civility of men who'd once been brothers and now were something colder. Didn't think we'd see you down here, Harrison said. Command oversight, Reynolds replied. Somebody has to make sure your little science project doesn't burn itself down. Sarah, standing by the wall, caught the sharp glance he threw her way. Sergeant Mitchell, he said, as if the name tasted strange in his mouth. Still chasing ghosts, I see. Just learning how to hit them, sir. Harrison cut in before the tension thickened. She's one of my best. Reynolds smirked. That's what worries me. It was the first of many confrontations. Reynolds viewed her presence as a liability, a distraction. He questioned her reports, challenged her calculations, and once even accused her of fabricating wind data during a simulation. But Sarah never raised her voice. She just proved him wrong again and again, until his criticism sounded more like desperation than command. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't just hostile, he was afraid. Not of her, but of what she might discover. One night, while reviewing archived mission data, Sarah noticed something odd. A file labeled Phantom Delta, REYNOLDS classified. Her access clearance didn't permit entry, but the timestamp caught her eye. The file had been modified just 2 days before her father's death. She tried to open it anyway. The terminal flashed red, access denied, Tier 0 authorization required. Moments later, a security alert appeared on the screen. User activity logged. Her blood ran cold. Someone knew she had tried. Before she could decide what to do, Harrison appeared at her door. "What did you access?" "Something about Operation Phantom," she admitted. "I didn't open it." He sighed, rubbing his temple. "You have to be careful, Sarah. Reynolds has eyes everywhere." "You think he's hiding something?" "I think he's hiding everything." He looked her in the eye. "There are rumors that he was on your father's last mission, that he walked away when no one else did." Sarah felt her throat tighten. "He told me he was never there." Harrison's expression hardened. Then he lied. The next morning, training resumed as if nothing had changed. But every sound, every command felt different now. Every time Reynolds walked into a room, she watched him like a hawk. She studied his habits, the way he lingered near secured terminals, the coded messages he received but never logged. He was too careful for a man with nothing to hide. Harrison seemed to notice, too. One evening, he handed her a sealed envelope. "Inside are coordinates to a storage cache in the North Range," he said quietly. "Old mission archives. Your father's handwriting is in some of them." She looked at him in shock. "Why are you giving this to me?" "Because you deserve to see the truth before it's erased again." That night she hiked out under moonlight to the abandoned range. Wind whispered through the tall grass, and the air tasted of dust and secrets. At the coordinates she found a half-buried ammo box, rusted but intact. Inside were sealed documents, an old data drive, and a weathered photograph. The photo showed her father standing with 4 men. One was Harrison. The other was Reynolds. Her stomach dropped. The date on the back, 2 days before the helicopter crash. By dawn, Sarah sat alone in her bunk, staring at the photo until her eyes blurred. The realization sank deep. The man trying to undermine her training had once stood beside her father. And if Harrison was right, maybe Reynolds was the last person to see William Mitchell alive. Her thoughts twisted between rage and disbelief. What if he'd betrayed them? What if the crash wasn't an accident at all? She opened her father's old field notes again. The last line burned into her mind. "Phantom compromised, trust no one." The words felt like a warning he'd written for her. Weeks passed in uneasy silence. Sarah continued training, but every drill felt heavier. Every shot echoed with ghosts. Harrison pretended not to notice her exhaustion, though he knew. Finally, he broke the tension during a late-night observation exercise. "You think Reynolds killed your father," he said flatly. "I think he knows who did. And you plan to confront him. When the time comes." Harrison nodded. "Then be smart about it. Truth is like a target in a crosswind. If you rush the shot, you miss." He paused. "You're your father's daughter, Sarah, but remember, even ghosts can bleed." She gave a small, humorless smile. "Then it's time I start haunting one." That night, alone in her quarters, Sarah replayed her father's voice in her head, soft, steady, calm. Discipline, focus, respect. She closed her eyes and made a silent vow. Whatever the cost, she would uncover what happened in that last mission. The truth about Operation Phantom, the Osiris Protocol, and the man who'd walked away. For years, she'd lived by her father's rules. Now, she was going to break them to finish what he started. The shadows were calling, and this time she was ready to answer. Why did they promote her now? That question circled her mind as the helicopter descended toward Fort Bragg. The air shimmered with the afternoon heat, the blades chopping through sunlight like rhythmic thunder. It had been almost a year since the bunker, since she found the photo that shattered everything she thought she knew. Now she was Staff Sergeant Mitchell, reassigned as a lead instructor for advanced marksmanship, officially to train the next generation of Army snipers, unofficially to keep her visible. Reynolds had made sure of that. On paper, the promotion looked like recognition. In practice, it was a leash. As she stepped off the helicopter, the wind tugging at her uniform, a young corporal met her with a salute. "Ma'am, welcome to Bragg, command waiting inside." She nodded, expression unreadable. "Let's get it over with." The base smelled of clay and gunpowder, familiar, almost comforting. Soldiers moved in crisp formation, laughter echoing between barracks. It all felt normal, too normal. Inside the operations building, Captain Reynolds stood by the briefing table, arms folded, eyes already sharp with condescension. "Sergeant Mitchell," he said, his tone dripping formality. "Congratulations on the new assignment." "Didn't realize you were the one handing out congratulations these days," she replied. He smiled thinly. "Orders from above. Your training metrics caught attention. You'll be shaping our long-range tactics division. And you'll be supervising." Something like that. Their eyes locked, neither blinking, both remembering the photograph buried in that ammo box. "You still don't trust me," he said finally. Sarah's voice stayed calm. "Trust is earned, sir." "Then earn it back." He turned, dismissing her with the arrogance of rank. But as he walked away, Sarah caught something beneath his tone, not authority but unease. The next few weeks were relentless. Days filled with drills, debriefings, weapon calibration, and endless mentoring. Recruits came from all over, some too eager, some too reckless. She taught them the same lesson her father had taught her: respect the silence between shots. It tells you who you are. Her classes became legend. Recruits whispered about the woman who could read wind by sound, who hit a 5-inch steel plate at a mile without missing twice. They called her Ghost Daughter. The nickname spread faster than she liked. It reminded her too much of the man who'd once been Ghost 6. But it wasn't all admiration. A few senior officers resented her rise. Some questioned her credentials. Others whispered that her scores were falsified. Sarah ignored them. She had bigger targets. At night, after everyone left, she stayed in the range's control tower, accessing archived mission data through back channels Harrison had once shown her. There, among dull logistics reports and training logs, she found it again. Osiris Protocol, stamped compartmentalized access. The metadata linked back to Defense Intelligence Command, with the author line reading, R. Reynolds. Her heart hammered. Reynolds hadn't just known about the program, he'd helped create it. A week later, a visitor arrived. Harrison. He appeared in civilian clothes, walking with a slight limp she'd never seen before. His presence filled the corridor like a memory, steady, quiet, dangerous. "You're not supposed to be here," she said. "Neither are you," he replied with a small smile. "I heard they stuck you behind a desk." She folded her arms. "Behind a firing line, technically. Same thing when they're trying to bury you." He followed her into her office, where the lights buzzed faintly. "I need to know if you've learned anything," he said. "I found a file, Osiris Protocol, written by Reynolds." Harrison exhaled, long and slow. "Then it's worse than I thought. You told me my father died hunting Zakharov. What if Reynolds was part of that hunt?" Harrison's gaze hardened. then were standing on the ashes of the same lie he helped build. He handed her a flash drive. Encrypted data from an intercepted transmission 3 weeks ago. Coordinates traced to the Caucasus Mountains, same region your father was last deployed in. Sarah stared at the drive like it was a live round. Zakharov. Maybe what's left of his work. Either way, someone's funding it again. She looked out the window, recruits still shouting cadence in the distance. If this gets out. It won't, Harrison said. Not if Reynolds has anything to say about it. You need to keep playing your part. My part? The loyal instructor, the obedient soldier, let him think he's one. And when he stops watching, then we move. But the move came sooner than either expected. 2 nights later, a security alert woke her at 300. Unauthorized access, Armory Bay 4. Sarah grabbed her sidearm and sprinted through the corridor. The hall lights flickered, power surge. When she reached the bay, the door was already open. Inside, the racks were stripped. Precision rifles gone, ammunition crates missing. And on the floor, a dropped ID card. Harrison J. Her breath caught. No, not him. Moments later, Reynolds appeared behind her, a flashlight beam slicing through the darkness. What the hell happened here? He barked. I was hoping you'd tell me. He lifted the ID card with gloved fingers. Your mentor seems to have developed poor timing. That's not possible, she said. He wouldn't. Save it. His tone was sharp now. Command will handle this. You're off duty until further notice. He turned to leave, then paused. And Mitchell, sometimes ghosts aren't who we think they are. They detained Harrison within 24 hours. Classified charges, no visitation, no contact. The official line, theft of restricted weapons and intelligence compromise. The unofficial truth, Sarah didn't believe a word of it. Still, she was forced to play along. They grounded her, reassigned her to administrative duties. Days turned to a haze of paperwork and protocol, a cage disguised as an office. But isolation had its uses. She began piecing together fragments from the flash drive Harrison had left her. Most files were encrypted, but one audio log played clean. Phantom was never shut down. Osiris continued. Mitchell discovered the link. Reynolds ordered. Static cut. Her pulse raced. Reynolds ordered what? She tried to restore the rest of the file, but before she could finish, her computer locked up. A warning flashed. Remote access DATACTED. Someone was erasing the drive in real time. She yanked it out, heart pounding. Too late, half the file's gone. The next morning, Reynolds summoned her. Rough night, he asked, smiling faintly. Sarah didn't answer. He slid a document across the table. Transfer orders, overseas assignment, joint task group. Where? Caucasus region. The air froze. He knew. Why me? She asked, voice calm but cold. Because you're the best shot we have, he said, and because I want to see what you do when ghosts start shooting back. That night she sat alone in the barracks, the folded flag still locked in her footlocker. Outside, wind whispered through pine trees like a voice she half remembered. She thought of Harrison, caged for crimes he didn't commit. She thought of her father, silenced for truth he'd almost spoken. And she thought of Reynolds, the man who stood smiling in both their shadows. This mission, it wasn't a deployment, it was bait. She opened her journal, writing in tight, deliberate strokes. Objective, confirm link between Reynolds and Osiris. Secondary, locate Zakharov. Tertiary, survive. She closed the book, exhaled slowly and whispered to herself, if they want a ghost, I'll give them one. Departure came before dawn. The hangar was silent except for the metallic hum of a cargo plane warming up. She slung her rifle case over her shoulder and handed the flight officer her manifest. As she climbed the ramp, she caught her reflection in the aircraft's fuselage, calm, composed, unbreakable. But beneath that stillness ran something colder, resolve sharpened into steel. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about truth. And truth, she knew now, was a weapon of its own. 30,000 feet above the Atlantic, she stared at the clouds below, the world soft and innocent beneath her boots. The engines droned like a heartbeat. A young pilot leaned over from the cockpit doorway. "You heading out for long?" "Depends what I find." He grinned awkwardly. "They say the mountains out there eat people alive." She looked out the window. "Then they've never met me." Hours later, as the plane cut through night over Eastern Europe, Sarah closed her eyes and let the hum lull her into something like sleep. And in the darkness behind her eyelids, she saw her father again, standing at a firing line bathed in sunlight. He wasn't speaking, just watching. Silent pride in his eyes. When she opened her eyes again, the pilot's voice came over the intercom. "Approaching drop zone, 10 minutes out." Sarah tightened her harness, checked her rifle, and whispered under her breath, "Breathe, aim, trust what you know." The ramp lowered. Cold mountain air surged into the cabin. She stepped forward into the roar and vanished into the night sky. What kind of mission begins with a lie? Sarah asked herself that as her boots hit frozen soil, her parachute collapsing behind her like a dying shadow. The air was sharp, thin, and bitter, the kind that burned lungs and punished movement. The Caucasus Range stretched in every direction, jagged ridges of snow and stone, silent and endless. She crouched low, scanning the ridgeline. The night was moonless, wind slicing across the peaks. A soft green flicker caught her eye, a signal. 2 short bursts, one long. Friendly. She moved toward it, rifle close, every footstep deliberate. Minutes later, she reached a rocky outcrop overlooking a narrow valley. A small camp sat hidden under camouflage nets, 2 tents, a comms rig, and 4 figures in dark uniforms. As she approached, one turned tall, broad-shouldered, eyes half hidden under a black beanie. His expression was calm, assessing. "Mitchell," he said. "Yeah." "Commander Hale, SEAL Team 7. His handshake was firm, controlled, not the kind that tried to prove strength, but the kind that measured it. "Didn't think Army snipers liked our mountains," he said. "I go where they tell me," she replied. He gave a faint smile. "You'll fit right in." Behind him, 3 operators moved with quiet efficiency. Their gear bore no insignia, only numbers scrawled in marker. They worked like a single machine, silent, practiced, lethal. Hale gestured toward the map laid out on the table. "We're here," he said, tapping the coordinates. "Small valley, old Soviet facility about 6 clicks east. Satellite intel shows movement, heat signatures, probably around a dozen hostiles." Sarah studied the map. "Zakharov." "That's the theory. Intel came from your people, DIA." "Meaning Reynolds," she said quietly. Hale raised an eyebrow. "That a problem?" "Let's just say I don't trust their track record." He looked at her for a long moment. "You've got ghosts, Mitchell." "Don't we all?" The team moved at dawn. The mountains glowed faint blue as the first light crawled over the ridges. Snow crunched under their boots, their breaths hanging like mist. Sarah carried her M24A3 modified, tuned to her exact specifications. Her father's rifle had looked almost identical. Every step forward felt like walking into the past. They reached a ledge overlooking the valley by midday. Below, an old Soviet outpost sat carved into the mountain, concrete walls half buried in ice, satellite dishes long dead. But movement stirred near the entrance. Guards, equipment, a working generator. Hale knelt beside her. "You're our eyes. We move when you say it's clear." Sarah adjusted her scope. "Give me a minute." Through the lens, the world narrowed to shadows and breath. She counted 6 armed men at the main gate. two patrols circling the perimeter, and beyond the fence, a smaller structure, half collapsed, but guarded by heavier rifles. "Command post," she murmured. "That's where we start." Hale nodded. "Take them down quietly, we'll follow." Sarah lined up her first shot, the guard nearest the watchtower. Inhale, exhale halfway, hold. The rifle cracked softly, the suppressor muting the sound to a whisper. The target dropped without a sound. Second shot left flank. Third, entry guard. 3 bodies, 3 heartbeats gone. "Clear to move," she whispered. The SEALs advanced with fluid precision. Within minutes, the perimeter was silent. The team breached the command post, clearing rooms one by one. Sarah followed, rifle ready, eyes scanning corners. Inside, the walls were covered in old Soviet markings, faded Cyrillic, yellowing maps, cables snaking into the floor. But the computers were modern, new. Someone had rebuilt this place. One of the SEALs, a tech named Graves, plugged into the terminal. "Power's live, pulling data now." Hale turned to Sarah. "You've seen anything like this?" She shook her head. "But I've seen what comes after." Then Graves froze. Commander," he said quietly, "you're gonna want to see this." On the screen, a document loaded, stamped with a seal Sarah recognized immediately. DIA, Project Osiris. Her throat tightened. "This can't be right," she whispered. But Hale scrolled down. Under Project Lead it read, "Capt. Robert Reynolds." And beneath it, a second line that made her heart stop. "Field Operative, William Mitchell." Her father. For a long moment, no one spoke. The sound of the wind outside filled the silence. Hale finally said, "You okay?" Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "That's my father's name." "Then you were right," he said quietly. "Someone buried this." Graves downloaded the file to a secure drive. "Sir, there's more coordinates, activity logs, something about Phase 2 activation." "Copy it all," Hale said. Before they could move, static crackled in their earpieces. Then a voice. Smooth, cold, familiar. "Well done, Sergeant Mitchell. You always were your father's best student." Sarah froze. "Reynolds," she whispered. The voice continued, almost calm. "Did you really think I wouldn't know? That I wouldn't see you digging into places above your pay grade?" Hale gestured to cut comms, but the channel was locked open. "Your father found Zakharov once. He should have walked away. You won't make the same mistake, will you?" "Where are you?" she hissed. "Closer than you think." Then the signal cut. A second later, the facility lights flickered, and alarms began to wail. "Contact," Graves shouted. Gunfire erupted from the east wall. The SEALs dropped to cover, returning controlled bursts. Sarah hit the floor, rolling behind a steel crate. "Ambush," Hale barked. "They were waiting for us." Sarah peeked through her scope, figures emerging from the snow, black-clad, faces masked. They moved like professionals, military precision. "Not locals," she muttered. "These are trained operators." Hale grimaced. "DIA strike team." "Reynolds sent them," Sarah said. "Then he wants the site burned." She fired, each shot methodical. 2 targets down. A third fell before reaching cover. But they were outnumbered. The walls shook under incoming fire. "Graves, data secure," Hale yelled. "Almost 90% wait." The generator exploded. The blast threw them to the floor, heat searing through the dust. Alarms went dark. The room filled with smoke. Sarah coughed, dragging Graves up by his vest. "Move." They retreated through the side corridor, Hale covering the rear. Bullets snapped against concrete as they fled toward the exit tunnel. Outside, the valley burned. Flames licked through the snow, painting the night in orange and ash. Hale signaled toward the ridge. "Evac routes compromised, we climb." Sarah's lungs screamed as they ascended the slope, ice slipping beneath their boots. Graves stumbled, clutching the hard drive to his chest. "Don't drop that," she said. "Wasn't planning to." A helicopter appeared on the horizon, dark silhouette, no lights, not friendly. "Down," Hale barked. The aircraft swept low, machine gun fire tearing through the ridge. Rocks exploded around them. Sarah pressed against the ice, heart hammering. "Anti-exfil," Hale muttered. "They're cleaning house." He looked at her, voice low. "We can't let that data fall back into their hands." Sarah nodded. "Then we don't." She grabbed Graves' drive, stuffed it into her pack, and took aim through the smoke. One breath. One shot. The round struck the helicopter's engine housing. The bird lurched, smoke trailing from its side. A heartbeat later, it spiraled downward, crashing into the valley below in a burst of fire. The explosion echoed for miles, a single, defiant heartbeat against the silence of betrayal. They didn't stop climbing until dawn. By then, only 3 of them remained: Sarah, Hale, and Graves. The others had fallen behind, lost in the chaos. At the ridge crest, they collapsed behind cover, breath misting in the frozen air. The horizon glowed red from the wreckage below. Graves handed her the drive, his voice trembling. This is above us, isn't it?" Sarah nodded. "Way above." Hale studied her face. "Reynolds is playing a long game. If he sent that team, it means there's more than data he's trying to hide." Sarah looked east toward the mountains beyond. "Zakharov's still out there. My father found him once. I'll finish what he started." Hale's gaze softened, part respect, part warning. "You go after this alone, you won't come back." She met his eyes. "Then I won't come back empty." They sat in silence as the wind howled through the peaks. Hale finally broke it. "You know," he said, "when Reynolds briefed us on this mission, he said you were just a shooter. He didn't mention you were the reason we're still alive." She gave a tired smile. "He probably forgot." "No," Hale said quietly. "He remembers. That's why he's afraid of you." That night, while Hale and Graves rested, Sarah sat by the dying campfire, her father's photo in her hand, the same one she'd found buried in that ammo box. She traced the faces in the picture: Harrison, Reynolds, her father in the middle. All of them once trusted each other. Now only ghosts remained. She whispered to the photograph, "I know what you tried to do, Dad, and I know what it cost you." The wind carried her words into the cold dark. She glanced at the data drive again, its metal casing scratched, edges dented. Inside were truths powerful enough to destroy careers, maybe even governments. But the truth alone wasn't enough. She needed proof. Somewhere in those mountains, Zakharov was still alive. And she knew, with an ache deeper than logic, that finding him was the only way to end this. Her father's voice seemed to echo faintly in the wind. "Discipline, focus, respect." She whispered back, "And finish what you start." As dawn broke over the Caucasus, she stood at the ridge, the cold biting her cheeks. Below, smoke still curled from the ruins of the outpost. She turned to Hale, who was already packing his gear. "What now?" he asked. She looked east again, toward a distant peak where the clouds gathered thick and dark. "Now," she said, "we hunt a ghost." "What does revenge sound like?" Sarah thought it might sound like silence. The kind of silence that follows after a mission goes wrong, after friends stop answering the radio, after your commander's voice becomes static. The silence that sits heavy in the chest and refuses to leave. The mountains were quieter now. No choppers, no gunfire, just wind and breath and the distant echo of things lost. For 3 days, Sarah, Hale, and Graves moved through the Caucasus Range. They traveled at night, slept in caves by day, and ate whatever rations they had left. Every direction was snow and rock. Every thought was weight. On the 4th morning, Graves' radio caught a faint burst, scrambled but familiar. Osiris phase activation. Static drowned the rest. He looked at Sarah. "It's still transmitting from somewhere east." Then we follow it, she said. Hale checked the map. East puts us near an old mining settlement, abandoned in the 90s. Maybe not anymore. They packed what little they had left and began the climb. By the time they reached the ridge, dusk had fallen. The air shimmered with cold mist. Below them, a valley lay hidden between steep walls, half-buried structures, rusted towers, faint orange light flickering from underground tunnels. Through her scope, Sarah saw movement, guards patrolling the entrances, trucks carrying crates into a freight elevator that disappeared into the mountain. "This is it," Hale murmured. "Osiris," Sarah said. Graves shook his head. "It's bigger than a lab. This is an operation." They watched for an hour, mapping patterns, routes, weaknesses. Sarah took notes quietly, her hands steady despite the cold. Then Hale said, "We need proof, not just data, something solid." Sarah nodded. "Then we go inside." They moved under cover of darkness. The snow muffled every step. The closer they got, the stronger the smell, diesel, metal, chemicals. At the perimeter fence, Sarah cut a narrow gap and slipped through first, Hale and Graves behind. They reached the lower tunnel undetected. Inside, the air was thick with heat. Lights hummed faintly along the ceiling. Shadows stretched long across concrete walls. Graves powered up a small scanner, watching the signal grow stronger. "Transmissions are coming from below, 2 levels down." "Then that's where Zakharov is," Sarah said. They moved deeper. Hallways turned to corridors, corridors to chambers filled with old machinery. At one point, they passed a glass room lined with medical equipment, tubes, monitors, samples in containment. "What the hell is this?" Hale whispered. Sarah looked closer. Inside one of the sealed chambers was a human form, motionless, pale, tubes running into its arms. A label read, "Subject 47B Neurological Conditioning Test." She swallowed hard. They were experimenting. Graves frowned. "On what?" "Not what," she said softly. "Who?" Deeper still, the corridor ended in a reinforced door. Russian text above it read, "Central Research Wing." The access panel blinked red. Hale studied the lock. "Can you bypass it?" Graves knelt beside the terminal, connecting his rig. Sparks hissed as he rerouted the power. "Give me 30 seconds. Sarah scanned the hallway. "We don't have 30. Footsteps echoed, 2 guards approaching from the far end. Without hesitation, she aimed through her suppressor. 2 soft cracks. Both guards dropped before their weapons hit the floor. Graves looked up, "Clear." "Then open it." The door clicked. Beyond it, a lab. And standing at the far end, half-turned toward them, was a man with silver hair and a calm, unreadable face. Viktor Zakharov. He didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't look surprised. "I wondered how long it would take," he said in accented English. "Your father was faster." Sarah froze. "You knew him?" "Of course, William Mitchell, a man of honor, foolish but honorable." Her hands tightened on her rifle. "You killed him." "No," he raised his hand slowly. "I tried to save him." The words hit like a shockwave. "Liar," Hale growled, stepping forward. Zakharov shook his head. "Your people did, not me." He discovered what Osiris truly was, what they were doing to human minds. He tried to stop it. They silenced him. Sarah's voice shook. "Who?" Zakharov's eyes softened. "The same man who sent you here, Sergeant Mitchell, Captain Robert Reynolds." Her world tilted. For a moment, even breathing felt wrong. "You're saying Reynolds killed my father?" Zakharov nodded once. He didn't pull the trigger, but he gave the order. He needed a scapegoat to erase the program's first failures. William refused to continue. He threatened exposure. So Reynolds burned the entire operation. Sarah felt something inside her fracture, not rage, but a terrible, quiet understanding. "What is Osiris?" she asked finally. Zakharov hesitated. Then he gestured toward a terminal. It was designed to erase fear, he said. Neurological conditioning. A soldier's brain without hesitation, without emotion. The perfect weapon. Hale muttered, they were reprogramming people. Zakharov nodded. Volunteers at first, then prisoners, then soldiers. Sarah felt sick. How many? Hundreds, maybe more. Your father found out during the first phase. He destroyed the data. I helped him hide what he could, but Reynolds found us. Graves whispered, we have to get this out. Zakharov shook his head. You won't make it. Reynolds knows you're here. He's coming. Then you're coming with us, Sarah said. He gave a sad smile. I've been running from ghosts for 30 years, Sergeant. Maybe it's time one finally caught me. Before she could reply, the lights went out. Gunfire shattered the silence. Contact, Hale shouted. Flashes lit the dark hallway beyond, silhouettes moving fast, coordinated. DIA strike team. Again. Move, Hale ordered. They fell back through the lab. Graves grabbed the data drives from Zakharov's terminal, shoving them into his pack. Bullets punched holes through the glass containment cells. Sarah turned to Zakharov. Come with us. He shook his head. Go, if you die here, truth dies too. She hesitated, then tossed him her secondary pistol. Then make it count. They sprinted through the corridors, shadows strobing with muzzle flashes. Graves was hit shoulder but kept moving. Hale dragged him toward the lift shaft. Up, he yelled. Sarah covered them from below, rifle steady. Each shot echoed like punctuation in a sentence written in blood. When the last of the strike team fell, she turned to follow but stopped. Behind her, Zakharov stood in the burning lab, firing through the glass at the soldiers pouring in from the opposite door. His silhouette glowed in the flames, calm, resigned. Then the blast hit. Fire rolled through the corridor, the shockwave throwing Sarah to the ground. She hit hard, ears ringing, lungs burning. When she looked back, the lab was gone. Zakharov was gone. They surfaced through a maintenance tunnel, crawling into freezing dawn. The mountain behind them smoked black against the sunrise. Graves collapsed, blood soaking through his sleeve. Hale tore a strip from his jacket, binding the wound. You'll live, Hale said. Graves winced, barely. Sarah stared at the burning horizon. He's dead. Hale followed her gaze. Zakharov. She nodded. He stayed behind. Hale's voice was low. Then he chose his way out. She didn't answer. Instead, she pulled the hard drives from Graves' pack. Their metal casings were warm from the blast. Inside them, proof, evidence of everything Osiris was. But she knew the truth. Reynolds wouldn't stop, not until the last witness was gone. They set up camp in a narrow pass, snow drifting in through the cracks of a collapsed shelter. Hale sat across from her, staring at the flames. What's the plan? He asked. Sarah's eyes didn't leave the fire. We take this to someone who will listen. Who? Everyone above him's compromised. She thought for a moment. Then we go around them. Hale studied her for a long moment. You're not thinking about going rogue. I'm thinking about doing what's right. He smirked faintly. Same thing these days. There was silence, just the wind outside whispering through the rocks. Then Hale said, you know, when I joined the Navy, I thought being the best meant killing without hesitation. But watching you, it's not that. It's about knowing when not to pull the trigger. Sarah looked up. My father used to say that. Smart man. She nodded slowly. He tried to teach me that strength isn't the shot you take, it's the ones you hold. Hale smiled. Maybe that's why Reynolds fears you. You can't be controlled. That night while Hale and Graves slept, Sarah wrote in her journal by the dim glow of the fire. Osiris, neurological weaponization. Reynolds, mission lead, cover-up confirmed. Zakharov deceased, assisted father confirmed innocence. Harrison imprisoned, must be freed. She paused, pen hovering. Then she added one more line. This ends with Reynolds. The wind outside howled louder, like a voice carried through time. Her father's voice. Sometimes Sarah dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. She closed the book, her expression calm, unflinching. Tomorrow they would head west toward an airstrip where Hale had contacts. But tonight, under the frozen stars, she allowed herself one moment of stillness. One moment to remember the man who taught her to aim with her heart as much as her hands. And as she drifted into sleep, she could almost see him again, standing in sunlight, smiling, whispering something she could barely hear. When she woke, she would chase it. The truth, the justice, the end. Why do the hardest wars begin after you come home? Sarah asked herself that as the plane touched down on the dimly lit airfield. The hangar lights flickered against the wet tarmac. No welcoming officers. No salute. Just cold rain and the quiet hum of engines. After 12 hours in the air, every bone in her body ached. Hale was silent beside her, his eyes scanning the perimeter like he expected gunfire. Graves, pale and bandaged, leaned against the bulkhead, clutching the small metal case that held the Osiris drives, the last proof they had. The pilot's voice came through the intercom. "Ma'am, orders are to hand the cargo directly to Captain Reynolds upon arrival." Sarah and Hale exchanged a look. Orders from Reynolds. She stood slowly. "Tell command the cargo is secure, that's all." The pilot hesitated. "Ma'am, I." "Do it." Her tone left no room for debate. They exited the plane into rain that felt like needles. Two black SUVs waited near the hangar, engines idling, windows tinted. No markings. Hale muttered, "Smells like a setup." "Then we don't play their game," Sarah said. From the first SUV, a man stepped out, dark suit, umbrella in hand. Not military. His ID badge identified him only as Defense Intelligence Division. "Sergeant Mitchell, Commander Hale," he greeted, voice smooth, practiced. "I'll be taking custody of the recovered data." "Under whose authority?" Sarah asked. He smiled faintly. "Captain Reynolds, he's waiting at command headquarters." Hale shifted closer, his presence suddenly heavier. "Funny, Reynolds doesn't usually send civilians for military property." The man's smile didn't falter. "Everything by the book." Sarah studied him, the umbrella, the suit, the calm eyes that didn't quite match the tone. "No," she said finally, "not this time." She turned to Graves. "You hold on to that case. No one touches it till we verify chain of custody." The agent's smile thinned. "Sergeant, you're risking." "I've risked worse." They walked away before he could reply. At the debriefing building, the security desk was empty. Phones rang unanswered. Something felt wrong, too quiet, too clean. Hale scanned the corridor. "This place is supposed to be full of staff." "Maybe they knew we were coming," Sarah said. They reached the main conference room. Inside, the lights were dim, the blinds drawn. Reynolds stood at the far end of the table, a folder open before him. He looked up slowly. "Welcome home, Sergeant Commander." Hale's voice was sharp. "You sent us into an ambush." Reynolds didn't blink. "You were compromised. I did what was necessary to contain the situation." Sarah stepped forward. "Containment doesn't explain why a DIA strike team fired on us, or why Zakharov's base was operational under your name." Reynolds' expression didn't change. "You've seen too much, Mitchell. You don't understand the scale of what's at play." "Then explain it," she said. He sighed softly. "Osiris was never meant to be a weapon. It was evolution, a way to build soldiers who could survive what ordinary minds couldn't handle. Your father believed in it once, until he lost control." Her hands tightened. "He lost control because he had a conscience." Reynolds' tone hardened. "Conscience doesn't win wars, discipline does." Hale slammed his hand on the table. "You murdered your own people for this project." Reynolds looked up sharply. "Watch your tone, Commander." Sarah's voice cut through the silence. You killed my father. Reynolds' eyes met hers, cold, almost pitying. Your father made a choice. I made sure his mistakes didn't destroy decades of work. Something in her broke, not with a sound but with a clarity so deep it hurt. Reynolds motioned toward the door. You'll both surrender your weapons and the recovered data. You'll be reassigned pending investigation. Hale laughed once bitter. Investigation? Into what? Surviving your trap. Two armed guards entered from the hallway. Sarah's mind moved faster than her pulse. She glanced at Hale, subtle a signal. Then she turned back to Reynolds. You know, sir, my father said something once. Reynolds tilted his head. And what's that? That dignity doesn't speak. Before he could respond, she moved. Her elbow drove into the nearest guard's chest. Hale struck the other across the jaw. In seconds, the room exploded into chaos, bodies colliding, weapons clattering to the floor. Sarah disarmed the first guard, swung his rifle upward, and aimed squarely at Reynolds. Don't, she said. Reynolds raised his hand slightly, expression still maddeningly calm. You think you can walk out of here? I don't need to, she said. I just need the truth to. Hale grabbed the case from Graves, who had slipped in during the fight. Together, they backed toward the exit. Reynolds called after them, his voice echoing. You're making a mistake, Mitchell. There's no winning against the system that built you. Sarah paused in the doorway. Then maybe it's time to tear it down. They vanished into the storm. Hours later, the trio drove north under cover of darkness, no headlights, no comms. The rain had turned to sleet, roads blurred into endless black ribbon. Graves sat in the backseat, pale and shaking. They'll come after us. They already have, Hale said, eyes fixed on the road. Sarah checked the hard drive, still secure inside the case. Somewhere in here is proof. We just need to get it to someone who will use it. Who? Hale asked. Someone outside the chain. She scrolled through the drive's data, line after line of encrypted files. Then one name jumped out, Harrison. Her breath caught. He's still alive. Hale looked at her. You sure? The file was updated 2 days ago. Transfer order, Washington, D.C. Military Court. She smiled faintly. They moved him. He's not buried yet. 3 nights later, they reached D.C. They found Harrison in a holding facility on the outskirts of Arlington, maximum security, minimum light. Getting in required disguises, false IDs, and favors Hale wasn't supposed to have. When the cell door finally opened, Harrison looked up slowly. His beard had grown, eyes sunken, but the sharpness was still there. Didn't think you'd come, he said. Sarah smiled faintly. You trained me better than that. He studied her, the exhaustion, the fire. You found him, didn't you? Zakharov's dead, she said quietly, but I found proof, and I found Reynolds. Harrison's jaw tightened. He's still running Osiris. Not for long, she said. Hale handed him the drive. Everything we could pull before the base went up. Harrison scrolled through the files, expression darkening. It's all here. Names, authorizations, field tests. This is enough to bury half of D.C. Sarah crossed her arms. Then let's bury them. Harrison shook his head. Not yet. You release this the wrong way, they'll brand you as traitors before the story hits air. So what do? Hale asked. Harrison leaned back, thinking. We find someone clean, someone with reach, someone who still remembers what honor means. He looked at Sarah. I might know one. 2 days later, they met her, Colonel Elena Vargas, Pentagon investigator known for making enemies on both sides. She agreed to meet them in a diner outside Quantico, away from surveillance. Vargas arrived in civilian clothes, her hair tied back, eyes sharp with suspicion. You realize bringing classified data like this into the open is treason, she said. Sarah met her gaze. Only if the people it exposes are innocent. Vargas sighed. You've made enemies that don't forgive." "Then they picked the wrong woman to underestimate," Sarah said. Vargas studied her a long moment, then opened the case. As she scrolled through the files, her expression hardened. "God help us," she whispered. "This isn't just a black project, it's policy. They've been deploying conditioned units for years overseas, maybe even domestically." Hale clenched his fists. "And Reynolds?" Vargas nodded grimly. "Still active, still protected." Sarah's jaw tightened. "Then we end his protection." Vargas leaned closer. "If you go after him, there's no coming back. No court-martial, no appeal. They'll erase you like they erased your father." Sarah's voice was calm. "Then I'll finish the job he couldn't." That night Sarah stood alone in the motel room, staring out at the DC skyline. So close, the heart of the machine that had built and betrayed them all. She remembered her father's face the day he taught her to shoot, the patience, the quiet pride. He hadn't raised a killer. He'd raised someone who believed in purpose. Now, standing in the glow of streetlights, she wondered if purpose could survive without innocence. Hale knocked once before entering. Vargas uploaded the data. It's moving through secure channels. Once it leaks, there's no stopping it. Sarah nodded. "Then we make sure Reynolds doesn't stop us first." He looked at her carefully. "You ready for this?" She met his eyes. "I've been ready since the day he buried my father." By morning, the leak had begun. Files, documents, transcripts. The name Osiris flooded encrypted networks. Intelligence circles buzzed like hornets. And somewhere in a high-security office, Captain Robert Reynolds was watching it all unravel. He picked up the phone. "Find her." But Sarah was already moving. With Hale and Harrison by her side, she drove toward the DIA complex on the outskirts of Langley, the place where Osiris began. As the building came into view, gray, massive, soulless Hale exhaled softly. "Last chance to walk away." Sarah smiled faintly. "Not walking, not today." She chambered around, her movements slow, deliberate. He wanted to build soldiers without fear. Let's show him what courage really looks like. They entered the storm. How do you face the man who destroyed everything you loved and still call yourself whole? That question echoed in Sarah's mind as the black sedan rolled through the gates of the DIA compound. Rain had returned, heavy and unrelenting, smearing the windshield into streaks of gray. Beside her, Hale checked his weapon, eyes cold, jaw set. In the backseat, Harrison reloaded his sidearm, movement slow, deliberate, the hands of a man who'd spent too long in cages. Ahead, the facility loomed like a monument to silence, all concrete, no windows, no soul. Sarah's pulse was calm, too calm. The kind of calm that only came after every fear had already burned away. "This is it," Hale said quietly. She nodded. "No more ghosts." They entered through the service corridor, bypassing the main entrance using an old clearance code Harrison still remembered. The halls were empty, sterile. Fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead. Sarah's boots echoed softly against the tile. She carried her rifle slung low, every movement measured. "Reynolds will be in the control wing," Harrison whispered. "That's where he runs his private servers." Sarah adjusted her grip. "Then that's where it ends." They turned a corner and froze. Two guards stood by the elevator, rifles raised before recognition flickered in their eyes. "Sergeant Mitchell," one said uncertain, "we thought you were." "Dead," Sarah finished. He hesitated. "Ma'am, Captain Reynolds gave orders." She leveled her weapon. "You still have a choice." Neither moved, but after a moment one lowered his rifle, the other followed. "Go home," she said. They did. The elevator ride was silent. Floor lights flickered past 2, 3, 4, then sublevel 5. The doors opened to a corridor lined with glass and server racks humming like electric heartbeat. At the far end stood Reynolds. He wasn't wearing a uniform this time, just a black suit, hands clasped behind his back as if he'd been expecting her. "Sergeant Mitchell," he said, his voice carrying across the hum, "you've caused quite a storm." Sarah stepped out, weapon ready but lowered. "You lied about my father, about Osiris." Reynolds smiled faintly. "No, I protected the truth. The world doesn't need to know how fragile its heroes really are." "You killed him." "I gave him a choice. He refused to evolve." Her grip tightened on the rifle. "You turned men into machines." He shook his head slowly. "I turned them into survivors. You think your father didn't understand. He built the first iteration. He believed in it until he realized evolution requires sacrifice." Sarah's voice trembled, not with fear, but fury contained too long. "You're rewriting history to justify murder." Reynolds took a slow step forward. "I'm preserving order. You leak Osiris, the government collapses, trust disappears, allies question everything, we lose control." Hale stepped beside her. "Control's exactly the problem." Reynolds glanced at him. "Ah, the seal, the loyal dog. You don't even know how many missions your unit ran with Osiris assets embedded. You've all benefited from it." Hale's jaw clenched. "We buried good men because of it." Reynolds turned back to Sarah. "You think you can carry truth like a weapon, but truth doesn't save nations. It burns them." She raised her rifle. "Then maybe it's time something burned." In a blur, Reynolds pulled a sidearm from his coat, but Sarah was faster. One shot cracked the air, grazing his sleeve and slamming into the glass behind him. The alarm screamed to life. Red lights washed the corridor in blood-colored flashes. Reynolds ducked behind the terminal bank, firing twice. Bullets shattered a nearby monitor. Hale returned fire, covering as Harrison flanked left. Sarah advanced, each movement steady, precise, like a shot measured over miles. Reynolds shouted over the chaos, "You think you're different from him. You're not. You're the same. A soldier who needs an enemy to stay alive." She stepped closer. "No, I just need an ending." The final exchange lasted seconds. Reynolds moved for a secondary weapon. Sarah fired once, center mass. The shot hit. He staggered, disbelief flickering in his eyes as he dropped to his knees. For a moment, there was only the sound of his breathing and the faint hum of servers dying around them. He looked up at her, voice thin. "You don't win by killing me." Sarah lowered her rifle. "I'm not here to win." She turned, walking toward the main console. Harrison was already at the terminal typing commands. "We've got everything. Backups, hidden logs, Osiris command codes." Hale joined them. "We upload it, the entire system goes public, every dark file, every secret." Sarah hesitated. Her reflection stared back from the monitor, eyes older than her years, calm but tired. Harrison looked at her. "Your call." For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she whispered, "Do it." The upload began, lines of data racing across the screen, secrets pouring into the world. Behind them, Reynolds tried to speak, but no sound came. He fell back, a faint smile twisting his lips. "You think they'll thank you," he rasped. "You think truth makes you pure. You've doomed yourself." Sarah looked down at him. "Maybe, but I can live with that." She knelt beside him, not with hatred, but with something quieter. "You wanted soldiers without conscience. I'm proof you failed." His eyes fluttered once and closed. When the servers went dark, the silence that followed felt heavier than gunfire. Harrison exhaled, almost in disbelief. "It's done. Osiris is gone." Hale looked at Sarah. "So what now?" She holstered her weapon. "Now we disappear." By dawn, the story had broken. News networks whispered about leaked files, experimental programs, unapproved missions. Names surfaced, resignations followed, investigations launched. But none of them mentioned her. Sarah Mitchell didn't exist anymore. Her records were erased, her name scrubbed. The world would never know who had fired the shot that ended a secret war. And that, she realized, was how it should be. Weeks later, deep in the forests of Montana, a woman in plain clothes stood by a cabin, watching the sunrise. The air was clean, the silence real. Hale arrived with 2 coffees, his limp barely noticeable. "You sure you want to stay here?" he asked. Sarah smiled faintly. "After everything, I think the world can survive without me for a while." He nodded, handing her a cup. "They're calling what you did treason, but some of us, we call it balance." She looked out at the horizon, gold spilling over the pines. "Truth doesn't need medals." Hale smiled. "Neither do ghosts." He left soon after, disappearing down the dirt road. That evening, as the wind picked up, Sarah sat on the porch with her rifle not as a weapon, but as memory. The same M24 she'd carried since the beginning, the same one they'd mocked her for holding. She adjusted the scope, eyes soft. In the distance, a hawk cut through the sky, free and silent. She whispered to herself, "You were right, Dad. Fundamentals are everything." For a while she said nothing else, just listened to the sound of the world moving on. Then she opened her old journal one last time, adding the final line beneath months of pain and persistence. "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts." She closed the book, set it beside her, and breathed in the fading light. The wind carried her father's voice again, quiet, steady, eternal. "Breathe, aim, trust what you know." And for the first time in years, Sarah Mitchell smiled, not as a soldier, not as a ghost, but as a human being finally free.